She steps into the courthouse with her chin raised just enough to hide the trembling in her breath, a subdued courage flickering in her eyes like a candle threatened by a draft. She's late, 12 minutes to be exact, and though she knows every second of tardiness will be interpreted as disrespect, she still had to stop outside to inhale the brisk air, steady her heart, and remind herself why she's here. Jasmine Crockett's footsteps echo in the towering marble hallway, each stride resonating with the unspoken tension swirling between her and the institution she's been battling for months. Guards in pressed uniforms glance at her but say nothing, as though they recognize the fraught significance of the day. The door to courtroom B looms ahead, a thick barrier of polished wood that symbolizes more than just an entrance. It marks the threshold between the illusions of justice and the reality of power. She does not pause to gather her composure. She simply pushes the door open, refusing to let the hush of the crowd intimidate her. At the far end, perched on the elevated bench like an untouchable monarch, is Judge Canning, an imposing figure with a crisp black robe and an unreadable expression. The moment Jasmine sets foot in the room, he brings down his gavel with a sharp crack that jolts every person out of their silent reveries. He doesn't even address her by name at first. "You're late," he says flatly, his voice echoing off the high walls. She doesn't flinch. She simply meets his stare. Across the aisle, prosecutors exchange glances as if they've been anticipating this confrontation. In the spectator rows, a handful of journalists hold their breath, pens hovering over notepads. No one makes a sound. Jasmine begins to speak, her voice quiet but firm. "Your Honor, I apologize for the delay." He cuts her off mid-sentence. "Let's not waste time. You have 5 minutes." The abruptness is calculated, a way to rattle her composure. She knows this, understands it as a tactic used by those who fear what she might have to say, but she refuses to let it shrink her. She takes the podium, scanning the faces in the room, noting how some avert their eyes, how others look at her with a flicker of solidarity. She clears her throat and begins. Her voice is measured, strong enough to be heard but tempered by the knowledge that the judge is watching for a single misstep. "It has come to my attention," she says, "that there are discrepancies in the chain of evidence. Discrepancies that I believe the prosecution has tried to—" Another interruption, this time from the judge's right-hand man, the bailiff, who steps forward as though to physically block her words. But she refuses to be silenced. She raises her voice, just enough. "Obscure the truth," she finishes. The moment is tense enough that one could hear the rustle of a single sheet of paper. Judge Canning's expression tightens. He leans forward, eyes narrowed. "Are you accusing the court of impropriety, Ms. Crockett?" She doesn't hesitate. "I'm accusing certain individuals of manipulating the system to ensure a predetermined outcome." An audible gasp flutters through the crowd. The judge's jaw flexes, the sound of teeth grinding faintly discernible. He gestures for her to continue, but she can sense his impatience. She can almost taste the unspoken threat in the air. One wrong move and she'll be held in contempt. She proceeds carefully, choosing every word like it might be the last she's allowed. She recounts the timeline she's meticulously pieced together, how the evidence changed hands multiple times, how crucial documents appeared and disappeared, how the voice recording that should have exonerated her client was conveniently deemed inadmissible due to a technicality that defies logic. Each fact lands like a small thunderclap, reverberating through the silent room. Then, almost imperceptibly, her microphone goes dead. She presses her lips together in frustration, seeing that the lights on the mic have dimmed. She looks towards the court technician, who shrugs helplessly. It's too coincidental to be a fluke. Nevertheless, Jasmine speaks louder, projecting her voice to ensure the back rows can still hear. "This is not the first time a piece of evidence has been cut off mid-sentence," she says, injecting a quiet irony into her tone. "And it won't be the last, unless we address the core of this issue." The judge slams the gavel once more, effectively silencing the room. He leans forward, eyes flashing. "I warned you about making unfounded allegations. This court will not tolerate baseless conspiracy theories." She draws a slow breath, controlling the tremor in her voice. "Your Honor, I have documentation. You'll find that none of what I'm saying is baseless." He doesn't respond immediately, and for a heartbeat the tension is thick enough to choke on. Then he gestures to the bailiff, who collects a stack of papers from Jasmine's hand. In that moment, she sees something flicker in the judge's gaze. Fear? She can't be sure, but she suspects he's aware that once these documents are on record, it will be harder to dismiss her claims as mere speculation. The journalists in the back look at one another, pens scribbling frantically. A couple of them have begun filming on their phones, though it's strictly frowned upon. Jasmine catches sight of a woman with a camera angled subtly behind her notebook, capturing every tense moment. The judge straightens, regaining his composure. "We'll take a short recess," he declares abruptly, ignoring the confusion that ripples through the courtroom. "Bailiff, see that these documents are verified." And without giving Jasmine a chance to reply, he stands and walks off the bench, the black robe swirling behind him in a rush of movement. The gavel's echo still rings in Jasmine's ears as he disappears into his chambers, leaving the entire courtroom suspended in an uncomfortable limbo. As the crowd begins to stir, Jasmine stands there, pressing her lips together, hands gripping the podium. The press and the public have seen only the tip of the iceberg, and she knows it. She steps away from the podium, catching the eye of a few silent observers who give her almost imperceptible nods of encouragement. She gathers her notes, carefully organizing them for what she suspects will be an even tougher battle ahead. Outside the heavy doors, a couple of reporters try to ask questions, but she offers them nothing beyond a polite, distant smile. She needs every moment of this break to center herself for what's coming next. She slips into a side hallway where her assistant, Nate, waits for her. Nate's eyes are wide with a mix of awe and concern. "They literally killed your mic," he says quietly, as though the walls have ears. "Twice," she corrects, wiping a thin sheen of perspiration from her forehead. "But I got most of it out there before they could shut me down." The judge looked, I don't know, angry, Nate says, struggling to find the right word. "He was furious, but not just at me," she responds, rummaging through her bag to confirm all the documents are still in place. "I saw a flicker of panic. That means we're close to something they don't want exposed." Nate nods gravely, whispering, "Do you really think you can prove collusion?" She looks at him without blinking. "I have no choice but to try." The moment lingers between them, thick with the weight of moral responsibility. She can see in Nate's eyes a reflection of her own convictions, the desire not just to win, but to uncover the truth, no matter how it might rattle the foundations of the institution. A bailiff appears at the end of the hall, calling her name. "Ms. Crockett, the judge will see you in his chambers." She feels a cold prickle of apprehension. It's unusual for a judge to summon a lawyer privately without the opposing counsel present, and it rings all sorts of alarm bells in her mind. She glances at Nate, who offers a faint shrug. "Be careful," he murmurs. She steels herself, squares her shoulders, and follows the bailiff down a narrower corridor to a door with ornate lettering, "Judge Marion Canning." The bailiff knocks, opens the door, and gestures for her to enter. She steps inside. The judge sits behind a massive mahogany desk, flanked by an American flag on one side and a state flag on the other. The dim overhead lighting casts shadows that seem to intensify the lines on his face. He doesn't look up immediately, instead flipping through the documents the bailiff delivered. When he finally lifts his gaze, he levels her with a stare that could freeze water. "Shut the door, Ms. Crockett," he says calmly. She hesitates, hand on the doorknob. She closes it, the click echoing ominously. He folds his hands on the desk. "I'll get straight to the point," he says. "These allegations you're making, did you think through the ramifications?" She doesn't respond. He continues, "Our judicial system relies on decorum, on respect for the bench. When you accuse officers of the court of conspiring to destroy evidence, you undermine public trust in justice." She takes a measured step forward. "With all due respect, Your Honor, public trust is already compromised when evidence goes missing or is suppressed. I'm merely shedding light on—" He cuts her off, a habit that is starting to feel more than coincidental. "Don't lecture me on trust." There's a tremor in his voice now, just enough for her to catch. "Your client is facing serious charges that could result in decades behind bars if proven. Think carefully about whether you want to continue down this path." She feels a surge of anger at his words, which reek of intimidation, but she also detects a note of desperation. Why would he be warning her instead of simply letting the evidence speak for itself? She speaks slowly, each word deliberate. "All I want is a fair trial, one free from tampered evidence, If that's a threat to anyone, it speaks volumes about the integrity of certain individuals, not me. For a moment, neither of them speaks. The tension crackles like static electricity. Then he stands, robe billowing as he circles around the desk. "I will not allow my courtroom to become a stage for baseless allegations," he says, his voice a controlled whisper. She doesn't retreat. "Then let the evidence speak for itself. If it's truly baseless, it will unravel. If not," she leaves the sentence hanging, aware that finishing it might push him too far. He stares at her for a long moment, then exhales slowly. "We resume in 5 minutes," he says. "I trust you'll keep your statements within the bounds of decorum. I'm giving you one chance to retract any claims you can't fully substantiate." She locks eyes with him. "I appreciate the warning, but I stand by my claims." He nods curtly, dismissing her with a flick of his hand. She turns to leave, and just before her hand touches the doorknob, he says, "You have no idea who you're up against." She pauses, heart pounding, but offers no reply. Then she exits, feeling the pulse of indignation fueling her steps. Whatever is simmering beneath the surface, it's bigger than one missing recording. She can sense it now, and she suspects the judge knows it too. As she re-enters the hallway, she finds the entire corridor abuzz with whispered conversations and anxious faces. Spectators and reporters have gathered for the next round of the hearing, and the air is thick with anticipation. She spots Nate across the hall, and he reads the tension in her expression immediately. He rushes over. "What happened?" he asks, voice low. She keeps walking, heading towards the double doors that lead back to the courtroom. "He gave me a thinly veiled ultimatum, essentially told me to back off." Nate's eyes widen. "You're not going to, are you?" She shakes her head, determination set in her jaw. "If we back off now, it legitimizes their tactics, and it puts my client at risk of a guaranteed conviction." The doors swing open to admit them, and the hush that falls over the room is almost palpable. Everyone is seated, eyes flicking from Jasmine to the judge's empty bench and then back again. She takes her place at the defense table, setting her notes in front of her. The seat beside her, her client's seat, is conspicuously empty. The client's not required for this preliminary hearing, but the absence weighs on her mind. She reminds herself this is bigger than any one person. It's about the principle of fairness. As if on cue, the judge re-enters with a stern expression, ascending to the bench like a king returning to his throne. The bailiff calls the room to order, and the tension returns, stifling any idle chatter. The judge looks down at her, then at the prosecutor, a slim man with wire-rimmed glasses who's been eyeing her with a kind of smug curiosity. "Ms. Crockett, are you prepared to continue?" the judge asks. His tone suggests he's giving her a final opportunity to recant. She stands. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge nods, a small tight dip of his head. "You may proceed, but I advise caution." She clears her throat, steadying herself. "I would like to draw the court's attention to Exhibit D14, the chain of custody log. On page 3, there's a discrepancy regarding who last handled the digital evidence. According to the log, it was transferred from Officer Hendricks to the evidence room on May 10th. Yet the digital timestamps indicate someone accessed it on May 12th, after it was supposedly sealed. She lifts the document, showing it to the court. The judge's expression tightens, but he motions her to continue. She goes on to detail how the data logs indicate unauthorized access, how the metadata reveals edits to the audio recording. The prosecutor shifts uneasily, arms folding across his chest, a telltale sign of discomfort. She can feel the tide turning, sense the crowd's attention sharpening. "And you believe," the judge interjects, "that this unauthorized access directly led to alterations that favor your client?" She meets his gaze. "I believe it led to alterations that disfavor my client, Your Honor." The removed segments would have exonerated him. Instead, the tampered recording, an abrupt crack of the gavel stops her. The judge points it at her like a weapon. "That's a serious charge," he hisses. "Do you have any proof beyond these logs?" She takes a deep breath. "We have a forensic analyst willing to testify, and we have a backup copy that was stored securely prior to the alleged tampering." Another wave of murmurs sweeps through the spectators, subdued only by the glare the bailiff casts in their direction. The judge's eyes narrow. For a moment, Jasmine wonders if he'll dismiss this entirely, but then he gestures to the prosecutor. "Mr. Webb, do you have any objection to verifying the authenticity of these documents?" The prosecutor stands, glancing at the judge, then at Jasmine. His voice quivers slightly. "We'll need time to review. We can't just accept her interpretation of the logs." "Then request the time," Jasmine says softly, but her voice resonates in the hush. "I'm not rushing this court. I only ask that we fully investigate." The judge exchanges a look with the prosecutor, then sighs, his shoulders visibly tense. "I'll grant a continuance for the purpose of technical verification. However, Ms. Crockett, if this is a wild goose chase," she interrupts him daringly. "I'm aware, Your Honor. I know the implications." He says nothing, but the gavel raps once, signaling the hearing's adjournment for the day. A surge of commotion spreads as people stand. Reporters angle to get a statement, and lawyers from other cases look on with curiosity. Jasmine gathers her papers, exhaustion and adrenaline mingling in her veins. Nate comes over, eyes bright with excitement. "You did it. You got it on record." She exhales. For now. She peers over at the judge's bench. He's vanished into his chambers again, but she knows this battle is just beginning. Outside, the sky has darkened with rolling clouds, reflecting the mood inside the courthouse. She slips out a side exit to avoid the throng of reporters, weaving through a narrow alley that leads to the parking lot. The wind picks up, and she wraps her coat tighter around her. For a moment she stands there, letting the chill remind her she's still alive, still fighting. In the distance, thunder rumbles low and ominous, as though nature itself is reflecting the tension that crackles around her life. She heads to her car, determined to sift through every piece of evidence she has before the next hearing. Over the next few days, Jasmine works tirelessly. She and Nate pull late nights, cross-referencing the chain of custody logs, verifying the metadata, and reaching out to the forensic analyst, a woman named Dr. Moreno, whose expertise in digital evidence might be the linchpin. Jasmine also pores over older cases that pass through Judge Canning's courtroom, searching for any pattern of suppressed evidence or questionable rulings. The deeper she digs, the more she suspects that this is not an isolated incident. She finds at least 3 other cases with suspiciously similar patterns, audio or video evidence that was lost or inadvertently destroyed, always to the detriment of the defendant. The next hearing is set for a week later. The morning of, the sky is still shrouded in bruised clouds. Jasmine arrives early, wearing a charcoal suit that complements the determined set of her jaw. Inside courtroom B, the atmosphere is electric. Word has spread about her accusations. Journalists scramble for seats, quiet murmurs fill the aisles. Today, Dr. Moreno will testify, and Jasmine knows this testimony could be a game changer, or it could provoke an even harsher clampdown from those threatened by the truth. Judge Canning enters, his face revealing no hint of emotion. The bailiff calls the court to order. As the hearing proceeds, Jasmine calls Dr. Moreno to the stand. The woman is composed, adjusting her glasses as she takes the oath. The prosecutor eyes her with a mixture of skepticism and anxiety. "Dr. Moreno," Jasmine begins, "could you please explain to the court what you found upon analyzing the backup audio file versus the official recording?" Dr. Moreno clears her throat, projecting calm authority. "Certainly. The backup file contained a continuous recording of the interview in question. The official file has 2 noticeable gaps. These gaps occur at crucial moments where the suspect provides an alibi and references a witness who could verify it. The metadata indicates that these segments were removed post-recording, after the file was labeled as evidence. The reaction in the courtroom is palpable, a ripple of shock and whispered outrage. The judge leans forward. "And you are certain these segments were intentionally removed, not merely corrupted or lost by error?" She nods confidently. "All evidence points to deliberate editing. The software used leaves behind a digital signature, which indicates that someone opened the file, removed the specific portions, and saved it under the same name to obscure the changes." The prosecutor tries to poke holes in her testimony, questioning her methods and the chain of custody of the backup, but Dr. Moreno remains steadfast, calmly parrying each challenge. When Jasmine reclaims the floor, she steps closer to the stand. "In your professional opinion, would the omission of those segments significantly alter the perceived guilt or innocence of the suspect?" Dr. Moreno doesn't hesitate. "Absolutely. Those omitted statements directly point to potential exonerating evidence. Their removal creates a misleading narrative that benefits the prosecution. The judge's expression darkens like a storm cloud. He shuffles papers, as though considering how to handle this bombshell. Then quietly, he dismisses Dr. Moreno from the stand and calls for a brief recess. This time, Jasmine doesn't retreat to a hallway. She remains at the defense table, acutely aware of the shifting energy in the room. Journalists scramble out to file quick reports, and the prosecutor storms off in a flurry of frustration. Once again, the judge summons her to his chambers, and she feels that same cold prickle along her spine. Inside his office, she finds him pacing, expression a turbulent mix of anger and something akin to regret. "This is a very serious matter," he says without preamble. "I hope you realize that if your allegations are proven false, it could mean disbarment for you." She meets his gaze. "I understand the stakes, Your Honor, but the evidence speaks for itself." He halts his pacing. "You still think it's just the evidence, don't you?" He lets out a hollow laugh. "Ms. Crockett, you're in way over your head." Her voice remains steady. "I'm not alone. The public is watching. The press is watching. If there's corruption, sunlight is the best remedy." His eyes flicker with a flash of bitterness. "I'm giving you one last opportunity to withdraw your statements, to settle this case quietly, and spare the system the embarrassment." She tightens her jaw. "Is that a direct offer?" He looks momentarily taken aback, then waves his hand dismissively. "You can interpret it how you wish. I'm trying to save you from consequences you don't fully grasp." Jasmine feels her heart pounding, the heat of indignation flaring. "The only consequence I'm interested in is justice. If the system can't handle embarrassment, perhaps it needs an overhaul." She turns on her heel and leaves before he can respond, the door closing behind her with a forceful click that resonates in the corridor. She returns to the courtroom, where the recess is ending. The judge comes in moments later, mounting the bench with forced composure. He announces that the court will schedule a formal evidentiary hearing to further investigate the claims of tampering. It's a small victory, a crack in the facade, but Jasmine knows all too well that exposing the truth can be a precarious endeavor, especially when the roots of corruption run deep. Over the next few days, tension escalates outside the courtroom as well. Jasmine notices unfamiliar cars parked across the street from her house. At the firm, phone calls come in with unsettling regularity. Hang-ups. Ominous silence on the other end. Nate reports suspicious figures lurking around the building after hours. Neither of them can prove they're being watched or intimidated, but the feeling is inescapable, and it only steels Jasmine's resolve. She compiles everything she's found into a thick binder labeled Institutional Patterns, cross-referencing every suspicious case that has crossed Judge Canning's docket. Late one night, she stumbles upon a sealed file that indicates a major scandal from several years prior. A scandal that was quickly swept under the rug. At the center of it was a corporation with deep ties to local law enforcement, rumored to have funded certain political campaigns. She realizes with a chill that the same attorneys who prosecuted those older cases are connected to the current prosecution. The suspicion becomes a certainty. She's up against not just a judge, but an entire network that benefits from bending justice. The morning of the evidentiary hearing arrives, and the courthouse teems with spectators, press, and curious onlookers. The air buzzes like a live wire, thrumming with the possibility that the day's revelations could shatter more than just one prosecution. This might be the day a carefully constructed web of deception starts to unravel. Jasmine stands outside the doors, binder in hand, Nate by her side. She draws in a slow, deliberate breath, recalling the countless nights she spent preparing for this. She thinks of her client, an ordinary man caught in a machine that devours innocence. She thinks of others who might have been railroaded by the same manipulations, their voices lost in the swirl of legal jargon. Then she steps forward, pushing open the doors to face the storm head-on. The hearing begins with formalities. The judge's stern welcome, the calling of the case, the recitation of procedural rules. Then Jasmine is invited to present her evidence. She stands at the podium, voice reverberating in the hushed space. Methodically, she walks the court through the timeline, the suspicious edits, the backup files, and Dr. Moreno's analysis. She references the older cases that show a pattern. Each piece of evidence is like a puzzle piece snapping into place, forming a picture so damning it draws muted gasps from the onlookers. The prosecutor attempts to object repeatedly, but each time, Jasmine counters with documentation, verifying every claim she makes. The judge watches in brooding silence, occasionally interjecting with clipped remarks. She senses his fury, but also a reluctant acknowledgement that she's built a formidable case. Then, at a pivotal moment, as she's reading from a transcript that suggests prosecutorial misconduct, her mic goes dead again. This time, the entire courthouse seems to hold its breath. "It seems my microphone has been cut," Jasmine says, voice trembling with controlled anger. The judge raises a brow, feigning ignorance. He motions to the technician to fix it. After a tense minute, the mic crackles back to life. Jasmine leans in, leveling a stare at the judge. This is exactly the kind of interruption that mirrors the tampering in the evidence, silencing voices in the middle of the truth. The judge's gavel comes down with a thunderous crack. "That's enough," he growls. But she doesn't shrink this time. She lifts the binder for all to see. No, it's not enough. And at that moment, every camera in the room seems to flash, capturing her stance of defiance. Spectators whisper among themselves, a collective moral echo that reverberates with the idea that perhaps she's right. Perhaps justice has been compromised in ways they never suspected. The prosecutor leaps to his feet, objecting to her theatrics. Jasmine ignores him, continuing to read from the transcript, detailing how an external consulting firm, funded by the corporate donors, assisted law enforcement in evidence management. She points out the glaring conflict of interest and how certain cases were dismissed or convictions secured based on manipulated files. She finishes with a direct appeal. "Your Honor, this hearing is about more than my client. It's about whether our legal system can survive if truth is consistently altered behind closed doors. If the court truly values justice, it will allow this evidence to stand and investigate every thread." The judge doesn't respond immediately, his expression thunderous. The room is silent enough that one could hear a heartbeat in the gallery. Slowly, he sets down the gavel, his voice a barely contained hiss. "Ms. Crockett, you are overstepping the bounds of this hearing." She meets his gaze, unwavering. "Then extend the bounds, Your Honor. Let the public see what's really at stake." He glances around at the sea of eyes fixed on him. He's cornered, and he knows it. The tension in his face suggests he's weighing whether to hold her in contempt or allow the hearing to proceed. At last, he exhales, deflating slightly. "We will review your documentation in full," he says through gritted teeth. "A panel will be convened to assess these claims. Until then, I'm placing a gag order on this matter. No further public statements." A flurry of disbelief ripples through the courtroom. Journalists murmur, and Jasmine feels her heart sink. A gag order will muzzle her, preventing her from speaking to the press about the case. She knows it's a strategic move, but at least the evidence is now on the record. She nods slowly, stepping back from the podium as the judge adjourns the hearing. But before he can fully exit, she calls out, "Your Honor." He pauses, glaring at her from under furrowed brows. "There's just one more thing." A hush descends, as if the entire room collectively inhales and waits. She lifts a small USB drive. This is the unedited audio file. It contains more than just evidence for this case. It has interviews with individuals who claim they were coerced to tamper with evidence in other matters. "I'm submitting it to the record for safekeeping." A ripple of shock courses through the crowd. The prosecutor's face pales. The judge's hand tightens around his gavel. With visible reluctance, he motions for the bailiff to collect the USB. "If this is a stunt, Ms. Crockett," she doesn't let him finish. "It's not." The bailiff takes the USB, and with that, the hearing officially ends. The judge storming out. The tension in the room bursts into a cacophony of voices. Some are outraged at the gag order, others stunned at the magnitude of what they've just witnessed. Jasmine stands motionless for a moment, letting the reality of it settle on her shoulders. She's just stepped onto the precipice of a major showdown. Outside, the sky finally unleashes the storm that's been brewing. Rain pounding the courthouse steps like an exclamation mark on the day's events. Reporters rush up to her, cameras rolling, microphones thrust forward. She can't say a word now because of the gag order, but the resolute look in her eyes speaks volumes. She walks silently through the throng, refusing to yield a single comment, her silence as damning as any statement she could make. Nate scurries behind her, shielding her with an umbrella. They push past the sea of press until they reach the parking lot, drenched despite their best efforts. Once safely inside the car, He exhales, adrenaline still evident in his quivering voice. We did it. Or at least we started it, but what now? She stares through the windshield at the sheets of rain. We prepare, because they're going to hit back harder than ever. And hit back they do, almost immediately. Within days, Jasmine's firm receives a formal complaint alleging professional misconduct. Rumors swirl that her financial records are being audited by the very agencies she's accused of collusion. Anonymous messages flood her inbox, warning her that she's crossed a line. She ignores them all, focusing on the next phase, the panel the judge promised. She demands transparency for that review process. But the system drags its feet. Weeks turn into months. The gag order remains, stifling public discussion. The press tries to keep the story alive, but without new statements from Jasmine, the narrative begins to wane. People move on to the next headline, though a small contingent of activists continues to rally for the truth. During this drawn-out limbo, Jasmine meticulously compiles even more evidence. She collaborates with Dr. Moreno, who uncovers additional digital footprints linking the corporate donors to selective data modifications. Together they build what they hope is an airtight case. Finally, after an excruciating wait, the day of the panel hearing arrives. The courthouse is buzzing once more, the tension even higher than before. The panel consists of 3 judges from neighboring districts, supposedly impartial. Jasmine stands before them, presenting her findings in a methodical, unwavering manner. In the seats behind her, a handful of watchers from the press remain, scribbling frantically on notepads since no cameras are allowed. The prosecution and the original judge, Canning, are also present, but in a different capacity. Canning sits to the side, no longer holding the gavel but looking every bit as imposing. When Jasmine finishes her presentation, the lead judge of the panel adjusts his glasses. The allegations you've laid out are extraordinary in scope, he says. You're claiming a systematic pattern of evidence tampering involving multiple state actors and private corporations. Do you understand the gravity of what you're suggesting? She lifts her chin. I do, Your Honor. But these documents, recordings, and witness statements corroborate exactly that. The panel confers quietly, then turns to the prosecution for a response. The prosecutor tries to dismiss her claims as circumstantial, but he can't refute the forensic data or the testimonies. He shifts tactics, accusing Jasmine of being motivated by personal gain or a political agenda. That's when Jasmine reveals one final piece of evidence, a sworn affidavit from a low-level employee at the consulting firm. It details how they were instructed to clean up certain files before handing them over to the courts. The affidavit describes pressure from higher-ups and mentions Judge Canning by name, suggesting he was aware of these practices. The courtroom explodes in a flurry of chatter. The lead judge pounds his gavel, calling for order. All eyes dart to Canning, who sits rigid and pale. He stands, attempting to speak, but the panel instructs him to remain silent for the moment. In that instant, Jasmine feels a sense of validation. Every ounce of energy she poured into this case culminating in a moment of truth. The lead judge, looking visibly disturbed by the evidence, announces that the panel will adjourn to make a determination. They retire, and the room is left in an uneasy hush. A swirl of speculation fills the space. Jasmine remains seated, feeling the adrenaline subside into a quiet, exhausted triumph. Hours later, long enough for tension to settle into the bones, the panel reconvenes. The lead judge addresses the room, voice solemn. We find sufficient evidence to warrant a full investigation into allegations of tampering, prosecutorial misconduct, and judicial impropriety. The gag order is hereby lifted. Court transcripts and evidence will be made available to the proper oversight committees. Further decisions regarding sanctions or criminal charges will be deferred pending the outcome of that investigation. The room erupts. Journalists scramble for quotes. Spectators cheer or stand in stunned silence. Judge Canning, face ashen, exits hastily, trailed by security. The prosecutor slips out a side door, avoiding eye contact. And Jasmine stands there, her heart pounding with a fierce sense of relief and vindication. She's not naive enough to think the fight is over. She knows how deep these roots go, how fiercely institutions can cling to their power. But for the first time, she feels the tide has shifted. Outside, she gives a brief statement to the press, now free from the gag order. She speaks calmly but passionately, reiterating that this is about justice, not vengeance. She calls for any others with knowledge of misconduct to come forward. The crowd listens intently, cameras rolling. Rain threatens again, but this time the skies hold back, as if granting her the space to speak. Over the subsequent weeks, the story balloons into a regional scandal. Investigations launch into the corporate donors, local law enforcement, and multiple high-profile convictions overseen by Judge Canning. Documents leak, revealing that hush money changed hands in some instances. A wave of public outcry demands transparency, forcing officials to open the books on more than a decade of cases. Meanwhile, Jasmine's client is finally granted a new hearing, this time under a different judge. With the unedited audio and corroborating evidence, the charges are dropped. He walks free, an emotional moment that underscores the personal stakes behind the legal drama. Jasmine, however, finds herself at a crossroads. She's hailed as a hero in some circles but branded a troublemaker in others. Her firm faces threats from powerful figures who like the status quo. She receives calls from potential clients who view her as a champion for the voiceless, but also less savory messages from those who feel she's destroyed their cushy arrangement with the legal system. Late one evening, in the quiet of her small office, she stands by the window, looking out at the skyline. The city lights shimmer with a deceptive calm, and she wonders how many hidden deals and backroom negotiations continue to shape people's lives. In the reflection of the glass, she sees her own tired eyes, the worn lines of determination that have formed around them. Despite the exhaustion, she feels a renewed sense of purpose. A soft knock at the door breaks her reverie. Nate pokes his head in. "I just got word from Dr. Moreno. She says the final forensic report confirms everything we suspected, and more. She wants to hand it over to the new oversight committee. They're asking if you want to testify." Jasmine turns from the window, meeting his gaze. The gravity of that step weighs on her. Testifying before a formal oversight committee means risking even more retaliation, but she thinks of her client, of all the clients who never got a fair chance because someone decided the truth was inconvenient. She thinks of how close she came to being silenced, how many times they cut her mic, tried to bury evidence, tried to intimidate her into submission. She rests a hand on the windowsill, exhaling slowly. "Yes, Nate," she says, her voice firm. "I'll testify." Over the following weeks, the climate shifts drastically. Journalists and activists dog every step of the investigation, refusing to let the story die. The corporate donors hemorrhage reputationally as more insiders come forward. Politicians scramble to distance themselves from the scandal. The once untouchable facade of the courthouse cracks further with each revelation. When the day comes for Jasmine to deliver her testimony before the oversight committee, she walks into the hearing room with her head held high. Cameras are allowed and the flashbulbs go off in a storm. She seats herself at a wooden table, microphone in front of her, reminiscent of the first day in Judge Canning's courtroom, except this time she controls the narrative. She speaks of everything she's uncovered, the manipulations, the hidden alliances, the intimidation tactics. She provides documents and references Dr. Moreno's forensic findings. Members of the committee exchange alarmed looks, scribbling notes. One or two appear skeptical, but the mountain of evidence is too tall to ignore. By the end of her testimony, there's a stillness in the room that feels like the calm after a devastating storm. She steps away from the microphone, scanning the faces of the committee members. She sees shock, she sees anger, she sees a flicker of hope. When the session adjourns, reporters clamor for a statement, but Jasmine remains tight-lipped, letting the official record speak for itself. Outside, the sunlight is bright and unseasonably warm, as though the world has decided to shine a little after all the darkness. She stands on the courthouse steps for a moment, soaking it in. Her phone buzzes, a message from a number she doesn't recognize. She hesitates, then reads it. "Well done, keep going." No signature, but the undertone suggests it's from someone inside the system, possibly someone who can't speak openly yet. She allows herself a small smile. As she descends the steps, she recalls the moment they first cut off her mic mid-sentence, the surge of anger and helplessness that followed. She thinks of the moment 4 minutes later when she found her voice again and decided she wouldn't let them bury the truth. That decision has led her here, standing at the center of a sprawling confrontation with institutional decay. There's no guarantee of victory. Corruption is tenacious, and it won't crumble overnight. But she's sparked a fire of accountability, and it's spreading. Cameras click, capturing her silhouette against the bright sky. Onlookers watch, some with admiration, others with apprehension. She walks forward, each step echoing with the knowledge that the fight for justice demands persistence, courage, and a willingness to stand tall even when your voice is cut off, especially then. She might have been silenced for a moment, but in that pause she found the strength to come back stronger, to use those 4 minutes to gather her resolve and expose it all. And as she moves through the crowd, the words still echo in her mind. She exposed it all, or at least enough to bring the rest tumbling down in due time. The system that once seemed so impenetrable now appears riddled with cracks, and through those cracks the light is finally shining. For Jasmine Crockett, that light is not the end of the journey, but the beginning of a much larger transformation, one that she is determined to see through, no matter the cost.